Sergeant Dale Kovac pointed his finger directly into Rachel Carter's face in front of every soldier in that motor pool and said the words loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't belong here. Send someone else." He laughed. His men laughed. And Rachel Carter stood there, 5'4", holding her rifle cleaning kit, saying nothing. What Kovac didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in 11 days those same laughing men would be pinned down bleeding and praying into a radio for the one person Kovac just threw away. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning it happened, the desert was already pushing 104 degrees before 9 o'clock. Outpost Halcyon sat at the bottom of a valley that had no business being called anything as peaceful as Halcyon. The mountains around it were sharp and pale, almost white in the summer heat, and the wind that came through the pass didn't cool anything. It just moved the hot air from one place to another and carried dust into everything, into your food, into your gear, into the corners of your eyes. The soldiers who had been stationed there long enough had stopped noticing it. The ones who were new still blinked too much. Rachel Carter had been at Outpost Halcyon for 41 days. She had stopped blinking at the dust after the first week. She was sitting on an ammunition crate behind the second vehicle bay when Kovac came through the motor pool that morning. She had her cleaning kit open on a folded cloth beside her, and she was working through her optics with the kind of patience that people who didn't understand precision work always mistook for having nothing better to do. She wasn't doing nothing. She was doing exactly what needed to be done at exactly the speed it needed to be done, and she would finish when it was finished and not 1 second before. She heard Kovac before she saw him. His boots on the gravel had a particular sound, heavy, deliberate, the walk of a man who had decided a long time ago that every surface he crossed belonged to him. He was talking to someone behind him, laughing at something, and then his voice shifted when he came around the front of the second vehicle and saw her sitting there. "Carter," she looked up, not quickly, not slowly, just looked up. "What are you doing out here?" "Cleaning my optics, Sergeant." He stopped. He looked at the kit laid out beside her. He looked at her hands. He looked at the rifle case propped against the vehicle beside her. And then something changed in his face. Not a decision exactly, more like a door opening to a room that had always been there. He turned back toward the group of soldiers who had followed him into the motor pool. There were 11 of them. Some were running maintenance checks. Some were carrying supplies. All of them, within about 4 seconds, had shifted their attention to what was happening near the second vehicle bay. Kovac had that effect. When he focused on something, other people focused on it too. It was one of the things that made him effective as a leader, and it was one of the things that made him genuinely dangerous when he decided to use that focus the wrong way. "You know what I keep seeing on the rotation sheets?" he said. He wasn't talking to her anymore. He was talking to all of them. His voice had gone up slightly, not loud, but projected the way a man talks when he wants his words to carry. Carter's name, every week, on the long-range qualification list. Some of the soldiers had stopped pretending to do other things. One of them, big kid named Ferris, who had been with Kovac for 3 years and laughed at everything the sergeant found funny, leaned against the nearest vehicle and crossed his arms. "You know what else I see?" Kovac continued. He looked back at Rachel now. "I see a medical support specialist who's been assigned to a long rifle she has no business carrying into any kind of field operation." Rachel set down the cleaning cloth. She did not stand up. "With respect, Sergeant, my qualification scores are—" "I know what your scores say." He cut her off without raising his voice. That was a technique, too. Cutting someone off quietly was worse than shouting, because it said your words aren't even worth the energy of a raised voice. "I can read numbers, Carter. What numbers don't tell me is whether somebody can hold a position when things get loud. What numbers don't tell me is whether a person built like you has any business being out on a ridge with a long rifle when the other side starts shooting back." Nobody laughed yet. They were waiting. Kovac looked at her, really looked at her, the way someone looks at a piece of equipment they're deciding to send back to supply bay. Then the corner of his mouth moved. "You're 5'4", he said. "You weigh what, 130? You think a long rifle is going to stay on target when you've been running for 20 minutes and your hands are shaking?" Ferris laughed. Then 2 other soldiers laughed. Then more. Rachel Carter looked at Sergeant Kovac. She did not look away. She did not drop her eyes. She did not change her expression. She looked at him the way a surveyor looks at a ridgeline, measuring, recording, storing the information for later. If you're not comfortable with my assignment, she said, you can take it up with command. The laughter stopped. Not because anyone was on her side, but because talking back to Kovac in front of his unit was not something that happened very often, and when it did, the room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet before something breaks. Kovac took one step toward her. Let me make this simple for you, Carter. If this outpost ever gets into serious trouble, and I mean real trouble, not a training exercise, not a qualification range, I'm not calling your name. I'm sending someone else, someone who can handle it. He paused. You understand me? Understood, Rachel said. Not yes, sir. Not I'll do better. Not an apology. Just understood. As if she had simply received a piece of information and filed it away. Kovac stared at her for another moment. Then he turned and walked away, and the soldiers around him drifted back to their work, and the motor pool noise came back up, metal on metal boots on gravel. Someone calling out a measurement from underneath a vehicle. Rachel Carter picked up her cleaning cloth, and she kept working. Specialist Ethan Brooks had watched the whole thing from 10 feet away, pretending to check a cable housing on the vehicle closest to him. He was 22 years old, had been in the Army for 14 months, and had not yet developed the particular kind of patience that lets experienced soldiers watch something unjust happen without their jaw tightening. His jaw was tight. He waited until the motor pool had settled back into its routine. He waited until Kovac's voice had moved off toward the operations building. Then he walked over to where Rachel was sitting and crouched down beside her. That was garbage, he said quietly. It was an assessment, she said. Not an accurate one, but an assessment. He humiliated you in front of the whole motor pool. He performed in front of the whole motor pool, she said. There's a difference. She held the optic lens up toward the light, checked it from a slight angle, set it back down. What he did today tells me 4 things about how he makes decisions under pressure. That's useful. Brooks looked at her. You're not angry. She glanced at him and something in her expression shifted, not warmth exactly, but recognition. Like she was deciding something. Anger is noise, she said. I don't carry noise. Brooks stayed crouched beside her for another moment. Your scores really are that good. The long-range qualifications. Yes. How good? She was quiet for a beat. Last cycle I shot a 3-inch group at 1,100 meters, 2¼ inch at 900. Fastest confirmed target acquisition in the qualification rotation. Brooks stared at her. Kovac never looked at the actual numbers, she said. He looked at me and made his decision. She picked up another component of the cleaning kit. That's his problem. I just need to make sure it doesn't become mine. That was the first conversation Ethan Brooks ever had with Rachel Carter. It was not the last. It would not even be close to the most important one. In the weeks that followed, Rachel Carter's official duties were adjusted. Not reduced, adjusted in the direction of invisible. She was assigned to training score log, which meant she sat at a desk and recorded numbers that other people generated. She was assigned to inventory management for the medical supply bay, which meant she counted things and moved them from one labeled shelf to another labeled shelf. She was placed on standby medical support, which meant she was available in case something happened, but was expected to stay out of the way while nothing happened. She did all of it. She did all of it without complaint, without visible frustration, and without ever once going to command and asking to be reassigned. The soldiers who noticed her at all during this period generally described her the same way quiet efficient, keeps to herself, not sure what exactly she does around here. That was during the day. At night it was different. Outpost Halcyon had a south watchtower that was only staffed from midnight to 0400 when visibility past the perimeter was handled by sensors and there was no need for a continuous human presence in the elevated position. After 0400, the tower was empty until morning rotation. Most soldiers used those hours to sleep, which was the correct use of those hours. Rachel Carter used them differently. She and Ethan Brooks had worked out a schedule within the first week. He would meet her at the base of the South Watchtower at 0415, carrying the spotting equipment he had signed out on a maintenance rotation that technically authorized him to have it, but did not explicitly specify where he needed to bring it. She would already be at the top of the tower by the time he climbed the stairs, rifle set up, data card in hand. and she would be reading the wind before he had the spotting scope oriented. The first night, Brooks thought it would be a training session. He thought they would work through some fundamentals, maybe run some dry fire drills, and he would learn something about long-range marksmanship from someone who clearly knew more than he did. By the fourth night, he understood that he was watching something he did not have the vocabulary to fully describe. It was not the accuracy, though the accuracy was extraordinary. It was the stillness. Most shooters, even very good ones, have a rhythm that is visible. If you watch long enough, a pattern of breath, a slight movement through the trigger sequence, a millisecond of hesitation before the break. Rachel Carter had none of those things. She seemed to reach a state somewhere between completely relaxed and completely alert, a state that Brooks had no reference point for, and from that state she would read the wind, not with instruments, but with her eyes watching the dust, watching the way the heat moved at the far end of the range, watching things Brooks couldn't even identify yet, and then she would engage the target, and the shot would be exactly where she said it would be. "How do you read wind that well?" he asked her one night after she had adjusted for a shifting crosswind in the middle of a sequence and kept a 5-shot group inside 2 inches at 960 meters. She thought about the question for a moment. "My grandfather," she said. "He was a long-range hunter. Montana, elk country mostly, but he went to Wyoming for antelope because the wind is worse there and he wanted the practice." "He taught you?" "He didn't teach me like school," she said. "He'd take me out and say, 'What do you see?' And I'd tell him what I saw and he'd say, 'Look again.' Every time, 'Look again,' until I started seeing what he was seeing." "What was he seeing?" "Everything that was moving," she said. "Everything that was moving and everything that wasn't moving but was about to." Brooks was quiet for a moment. "And what's the hardest shot you've ever made?" She didn't answer right away. She was making an adjustment to the scope, her hands moving with the kind of deliberate economy that had stopped looking like caution and started looking like fluency. 1,240 meters, she said finally. Montana, late October. Wind was coming out of the northwest at about 18 miles an hour with gusts that were unpredictable. The target was moving. She paused. It was an elk. My grandfather was watching from 50 meters behind me, and when the shot broke, he didn't say anything for about 20 seconds. Then he said, "That's the one." "That's the one?" That was his way of saying a shot was perfect, she said. He didn't use a lot of words. When he said, "That's the one," you knew. Brooks looked at her through the dim light of the tower platform. "Your grandfather sounds like he was something else." "He was everything," she said simply. And the way she said it quietly without any attempt to explain or expand told him more about Rachel Carter than anything else she had said in the entire conversation. She never talked about family beyond that. Not in any of their night sessions, not in the brief conversations they shared during the day, always careful to keep their distance in view of the rest of the unit, always maintaining the appearance of two people who were barely acquaintances. But Brooks thought about what she had said. He thought about a girl in Montana standing in cold wind on a hillside with a rifle while an old man waited behind her and watched and waited and said, "Look again, look again, look again." He thought about what that produced. And he thought about the fact that Sergeant Dale Kovac had looked at the result of all those years, all that patience, all that relentless repetition, and had seen nothing. Had seen a small woman with no business carrying a long rifle. It made Brooks angry in a way he couldn't quite articulate. Rachel Carter, for her part, was not angry. She was doing what she always did, looking at the evidence in front of her, measuring the variables, and continuing to prepare. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into her unofficial reassignment, she was working at the medical supply bay when she overheard a conversation between two senior NCOs near the operations building. She wasn't trying to eavesdream. The door was open and voices carry in the desert when the wind drops. What she heard was this: there was a convoy mission being planned. A routine supply run through the eastern pass, a stretch of road that cut through the valley between two ridgelines and connected Outpost Halcyon to a forward position about 12 miles out. The mission had been run 6 times before without incident. The planning assumption was that the 7th time would be the same as the first 6. Rachel put down the supply inventory she was updating and sat very still for a moment. She was thinking about the ridge lines. She had studied those ridge lines from the south watchtower in 17 separate nights. She knew their elevation profiles. She knew the positions along the northern ridge where the rock formations created natural cover that would be excellent for a firing position. She knew the dead angle on the southern ridge where you could suppress a convoy on the road below without being visible to observers at the outpost. She knew because she had spent 17 nights looking at everything that was moving and everything that wasn't moving but was about to. She picked up her inventory clipboard again. She made no report. She filed no concern. She said nothing to anyone because she understood something about the situation at Outpost Halcyon that was both very simple and very important. She had no standing. She had no role. She had been moved to the edge of operations by someone who outranked her and had made very clear in front of 11 witnesses what he thought of her judgment and her capabilities. If she walked into the operations building and told two senior NCOs that she had concerns about the Eastern Pass ridgelines, one of two things would happen. They would listen to her and she would be right, in which case Kovac would know she had gone around him and the situation would become worse. Or they would not listen to her and nothing would change. Either way, she had no proof. She had observations and instinct in 17 nights of data, and the thing her grandfather had given her that she couldn't put in a report, the ability to see what was moving and what was about to move. So she sat in the medical bay and counted supplies and said nothing. And she continued her nights in the South Watchtower with Ethan Brooks. And she continued to prepare. It was on the 19th night, 3 nights before the convoy mission, that Brooks finally said the thing he had been working up to for a week. They were breaking down the equipment after a session. Rachel was packing the rifle with the same meticulous care she brought to everything, checking each component before it went into the case, and Brooks was coiling the cable on the spotting scope, and the outpost below was quiet and the desert was dark in every direction. "You know something," he said. It wasn't a question. Rachel continued packing the rifle. "You've been quiet for the last week," he said. "Not your normal quiet, a different kind." "Different how?" "Like you're counting down to something." She closed the rifle case. She latched it. She sat back on her heels and looked out toward the Eastern Pass, which was invisible in the darkness, but which she could map from memory with the accuracy of a topographic chart. "There's a convoy going out in 3 days," she said. "I know. Through the Eastern Pass." "I know. I've been looking at those ridge lines for 3 weeks," she said. "North and south, both." She was quiet for a moment. "If I wanted to stop a convoy in that pass, I know exactly where I would put my people and exactly how I would do it." Brooks stopped coiling the cable. He looked at her. "You report that to anyone." "To who? On what authority? Based on what evidence?" She picked up the rifle case. "I'm a medical support specialist who counts supplies and logs trainings scores." "Rachel, I know what I see," she said, "and I know that what I see doesn't come with anything that looks like proof to anyone here." She started toward the stairs. "So I do what I can do. I prepare. I continue to prepare, and I hope I'm wrong." She started down the stairs. Brooks stood there for a moment looking at the dark shape of the Eastern Pass in the distance. He had the feeling, strong, uncomfortable, the kind that sits below the chest, that she was not wrong. 3 days later, the convoy rolled out at 0600. Rachel Carter was in the medical supply bay at 0615 logging inventory. At 0740, the first radio transmission came in from the convoy commander. "Contact, heavy contact, Eastern Pass. Request immediate support." The operations building went from routine to controlled chaos in about 45 seconds. Rachel heard it through the wall. She set down her clipboard. She waited. Because she knew what came next. She knew that artillery couldn't reach the ridgeline positions in the pass. The angle was wrong, and the elevation was too close to the convoy's own position. She knew QRF was 40 minutes out, minimum, probably 50, given the road conditions east of the pass. She knew the sensors on the outpost north perimeter had shown elevated thermal signatures on the northern ridge. The previous night, she had checked the sensor logs at 0300 when the operations building was empty and the logs were sitting on the duty desk. She had checked them because she had wanted to know, because knowing was what she did. She waited. The radio in the operations building was loud enough that she could hear the convoy commander's voice even through the wall. Multiple vehicles destroyed, soldiers wounded, pinned with no extraction, window enemy positions, dominating both ridgelines. She picked up her rifle case. She carried it to the door of the medical bay. She set it down and waited. It was 4 minutes later when she heard Sergeant Dale Kovac's voice, not calm, not composed the way it was in the motor pool that morning with his hands on his hips and his eyes moving around the crowd of soldiers like he was making sure everyone was watching, but tight. Controlled, but tight. The voice of a man who has run the numbers and does not like the answer. She heard him go through it: artillery unavailable, QRF too far, air support not on station, convoy running out of time. She heard the operations officer say, "What about long-range engagement from the outpost?" She heard Kovac go quiet. That silence lasted approximately 6 seconds. She knew because she counted them. Then she heard his voice again, and it had changed in a way she had not expected, not because she expected him to be incapable of changing, but because she had not expected the change to come so fast, or to sound so unguarded, or to cost him so visibly. He said, "Is Carter still on post?" Someone checked. Someone confirmed. And then she heard Sergeant Dale Kovac key the radio and say the words that would stay with her for the rest of her life, not because they made her feel vindicated, not because she wanted to hear them, but because they were the words the moment required, and he said them anyway. "Get Carter to the South Watchtower, now." Rachel Carter picked up her rifle case. She opened the door of the medical bay. She stepped out into the desert heat. And she began to move. She had the rifle case in her right hand, and she was already moving at a pace that was not quite a run, but was faster than anyone expected, when Ethan Brooks came out of the equipment bay and saw her crossing the open ground toward the South Watchtower. He didn't ask where she was going. He grabbed the spotting scope and ran. He caught up with her at the base of the tower stairs. She was already climbing. He fell in behind her without a word, the spotting scope banging against his back, his boots loud on the metal steps, while hers were quiet in a way that didn't make sense given how fast she was moving. That was the first thing he noticed. She was fast, and she was quiet, and she was not breathing hard. Whatever she was feeling in that moment, she had already moved it somewhere it couldn't interfere with her hands. She was at the top before he reached the halfway point. By the time he cleared the platform, she had the case open, the rifle out, and the bipod deployed on the forward wall of the tower. She was lying behind it, her cheek not yet on the stock, her eyes already on the eastern pass. "Wind," she said. He hadn't even gotten the spotting scope set up. "Give me 10 seconds, he said. "You've got 5. He got the scope oriented and read the mirage off the valley floor, read the dust movement at the far edge of his field of view, read the way the heat shimmer was angling off the northern ridge. 8 to 10 miles an hour south-southwest, he said, gusting, inconsistent. "I see it," she said. "I've got it." Her cheek came down on the stock. From that moment, Ethan Brooks understood that his job was not to help her shoot. His job was to give her information and stay out of her way. The radio on the tower platform was already live. The convoy commander's voice was coming through, broken and tight, the way voices sound when the person speaking them is lying flat behind something and trying not to move while they talk. "Outpost Halcyon, we have hostile positions on the North Ridge at approximately 800 to 900 meters. We have wounded. We have vehicles down. We cannot move." The operations officer's voice came back. "Halcyon copies. We have a long-range asset getting into position now. Stand by." A pause, then the convoy commander's voice again, lower this time, not over the radio, but audible through the static. "Please be somebody good." Rachel Carter was already on the first target. She didn't announce it. She didn't call out a range or confirm her position or ask for a status update. She found the first hostile position on the northern ridge, a shooter using a rock outcropping as a rest point, exposed from the tower angle in a way he almost certainly didn't know, and she read the wind for 2 full seconds, and then she broke the shot. The radio went quiet for a beat. Then the convoy commander's voice came back. "Shooter down. North Ridge, far left position. Who is that? Who is taking that shot?" The operations officer said, "Sergeant Carter, South Watchtower." Another pause. "Tell Carter to keep going." She was already on the second target. Brooks was calling distances and wind updates as fast as he could read them, and she was processing what he said in a way that looked effortless and was anything but. She was doing the math in real time, accounting for bullet drop, accounting for wind, drift accounting for the angle of the tower position relative to the ridge and the convoy below. And she was doing all of it while listening to the radio and tracking movement on a ridgeline nearly a kilometer away. The second shot broke. Second target down. The convoy commander didn't say anything that time, but Brooks heard something in the background of the radio transmission, a sound he couldn't immediately identify, and then identified as soldiers cheering. "Keep going," Brooks said under his breath, more to himself than to her. "Keep going, keep going." She kept going. The rhythm that developed over the next several minutes was not something Brooks had a word for. It was not mechanical, it was too alive for that, but it was also not hurried, not frantic, not the way he would have expected someone to operate with wounded soldiers on the ground and an active firefight in the valley below. It was purposeful. Every action had a reason. Every second of stillness before a shot was not hesitation, it was calculation. And when the calculation was complete, the stillness ended in one clean motion. Third shot, third target, fourth shot. Slight pause, she had caught something in the wind shift, read it adjusted, and then the fourth shot broke. Fourth target. In the operations building below, Sergeant Dale Kovac was standing at the radio console. He had not moved from that position since the moment he sent for Rachel Carter. He was listening to the convoy commander's updates. He was listening to Brooks' call in confirmations from the tower. And he was standing very still with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and the soldiers around him were careful not to look directly at his face. Private Garza, who was 19 years old and had been assigned to operations duty that morning and was therefore the youngest person in the room, said afterward that he had never seen Kovac look like that before. He couldn't describe it exactly. He said it was like watching someone realize something they couldn't take back and knowing that they knew it but having nowhere to put it while everything was still moving. That was a precise description. What Kovac was feeling standing at that radio console while Rachel Carter neutralized position after position from the tower he had refused to assign her to was something that operated below the level of pride or embarrassment. It was the specific cold sensation of understanding that your judgment was wrong in a way that had consequences for other people. Not for you, for other people. For 22 soldiers in a convoy that was pinned down and taking casualties and was still alive in significant part because of a woman he had publicly dismissed in front of the entire motor pool. He did not say anything. He listened. He counted. Up in the tower, Brooks was doing the same. He was calling data and reading wind and confirming targets through the spotting scope, and he was counting, and by the time Rachel had worked through the northern ridge positions, he was at 8 confirmed, and he was breathing in a way that he would not have been able to do if he had fully processed what he was watching in real time. He processed it later, in the moment he just worked. "North Ridge is breaking up," the convoy commander said over the radio. "They're falling back from the far positions. We still have active fire from the South Ridge, at least 4 positions. And we have a machine gun heavy northwest of our position. I'm putting it at 880, maybe 900 meters. It's hitting the wounded." Brooks felt his stomach drop. He looked at Rachel. She had already moved her point of aim. She was scanning the South Ridge. "South Ridge," she said, "talk to me." 4 positions, Brooks said, getting the scope back on the southern ridgeline. "Spread out 50 meters between each. They've got good cover down here. These are better than the North Ridge positions." "I know," she said. "They planned this." A pause, barely a second. "They knew the angle from here would be harder on the south. They put their better shooters there. So what do? I find the angle they didn't account for," she said. She shifted slightly on the bipod. Brooks watched her adjust her position by maybe 3 inches to the right, which from the tower platform translated to a meaningfully different approach vector to the southern ridge. "There," she said. "You've got it. First position South Ridge. Confirmed distance." Brooks read the scope. 830 meters. Wind, he read it. Still south-southwest, gusting between 8 and 14. "Give me a second," she said. That second was the longest second Brooks had ever counted. Down in the valley, a heavy machine gun was still firing. He could hear it through the radio, a deep, rhythmic sound that was the worst sound in the world when you knew what was in front of it. The shot broke. "Hit," Brooks said immediately before the confirmation even came through on the radio. He could see it in the scope. First position, South Ridge, down. The convoy commander's voice. "South Ridge, far right, yes, that's a hit. Keep it coming." She was already on the second position. This one was harder. The cover was better. The shooter had positioned himself in a way that gave him protection from most angles and from the tower. The exposure window was narrow. Not impossible, but narrow, and the wind was doing something unpredictable at the southern ridge elevation that Brooks couldn't quite read. Wind's doing something weird at the 800 mark, he said. I'm seeing mirage that doesn't match the surface read. I see it, she said. It's layering, different speed at different elevations. How do you adjust for that? You account for where the bullet spends the most time, she said. It's going to be in the lower layer longer than the upper. Adjust for the lower shade for the upper. A pause of our shiram, or you find a moment when the layers equalize. How long does that last? About 2 seconds. And how do you know when it's coming? You watch, she said. You watch everything that's moving. Brooks watched. He watched the mirage. He watched the heat shimmer. He watched the way the dust at the far end of the valley was moving relative to the dust at the midpoint. And then he saw it, a brief, almost imperceptible moment of uniformity, a 2-second window where the layers stopped fighting each other. He almost said something. The shot broke before he could. Second position, South Ridge. Down. How did you, he started. I was watching, she said. Third position, fourth position. She worked through them with the same patient, deliberate rhythm, and Brooks called data and confirmed hits and tried to keep up with what she was doing, which was becoming more difficult, not because she was going faster, but because he was increasingly operating it at the edge of his own ability, and she was not. She was not at the edge of anything. She was, as far as he could tell, operating somewhere in the middle of her range, and the middle of her range was extraordinary. Then the machine gun opened up again. It had gone quiet for about 90 seconds, long enough that Brooks had started to hope someone in the convoy had dealt with it. And then it came back heavier and faster than before, and the convoy commander's voice on the radio lost its controlled quality for the first time. That machine gun is hitting the casualty collection point. We have wounded in the open. Someone needs to halcyon. That gun is at 890 meters northwest. I need it gone right now. I need it gone. Brooks looked at Rachel. She was already moving her point of aim northwest. 890, he said. Northwest, elevated position. It's using the rock shelf. See it? The natural shelf about 40 meters below the ridgeline. I see it, she said. The wind is brutal from that angle. You're going to be shooting into a crosswind. I know. It's a moving target. The crew is shifting position between bursts. I know. Rachel, at this range with this wind? Brooks. Her voice was quiet, not sharp, not irritated, just very certain. I've got it. He stopped talking. He watched. What happened next, he tried to explain it to people several times over the following months, and he was never fully satisfied with any of the explanations, because the explanations required the listener to understand something that was hard to transfer: the quality of stillness she achieved in those final seconds before the hardest shot of the engagement. It wasn't the stillness of someone who had gone blank or emotionless. It was the stillness of someone who had gathered every piece of information available to them and was now present in a very particular way, fully alive, fully aware, and completely committed to the single action that was about to occur. The machine gun fired another burst. Rachel Carter exhaled. The shot broke. 1 round. The machine gun went silent. It did not fire again. Brooks sat with the spotting scope on the northwest position for 3 full seconds without saying anything. The convoy commander's voice came through the radio. That gun is down. That gun is who took that shot. Halcyon, confirm who took that shot. The operations officer's voice. Carter, South Watchtower. A long silence on the radio. Then the convoy commander said very quietly, tell her thank you. In the operations building, Garza said later, Kovac turned away from the radio console. He walked to the far side of the room. He stood with his back to everyone for about 15 seconds. Then he turned around and came back, and his face had the same controlled expression it always had, but something behind his eyes was different, and everyone in the room noticed it and no one said anything. But the engagement was not over. The fallen back elements from the northern ridge had not retreated to the road. They had moved. Brooks caught it first in the spotting scope, 2 figures moving fast along the base of the northern ridge, not retreating away from the outpost, but moving toward it, moving toward the tower. Rachel, he said, we've got a problem. She heard it in his voice. She pulled back from the rifle and looked at him. 2 contacts moving this direction, base of the north ridge. They're not retreating, they're coming for the tower. Distance, 400 meters and closing, moving fast. She looked at the approach vector. She looked at the rifle. She looked at the distance. The rifle's too much for 400 meters at this angle, she said. She was already reaching for the sidearm at her hip. I've got this. There are two of them. I know. Rachel. I know. She was already up from the prone position, already moving to the corner of the tower platform that covered the approach vector. Keep calling updates of the South Ridge. There may be more movement. I'm not going to just sit here and... Yes, you are, she said, because your job is to watch that ridge and mine is to deal with this. That's how we keep both things covered. He wanted to argue. He didn't argue because she was right, and because arguing with someone who was right when seconds mattered was exactly as useful as arguing with the wind. He put his eye back to the spotting scope. He kept the South Ridge in his field of view, and he listened. What happened in the next 45 seconds Brooks did not see. He heard it. Two shots from the sidearm, sharp and close, with maybe 3 seconds between them. Then silence. Then Rachel's voice, very steady. Clear. Get back on the radio. See if the convoy needs anything else. He looked over his shoulder. She was already back at the rifle. He did not ask about the two contacts. He got back on the radio. The convoy commander was reporting that the remaining hostile elements had broken contact and were withdrawing. Vehicles were damaged, but the column was mobile. Casualties were being stabilized. Evacuation was being arranged. Brooks reported this to Rachel. She was still on the rifle, still scanning the ridge lines, still watching everything that was moving and everything that wasn't. How many, she said. How many what? Confirmed from the tower. He looked at the notebook he had been keeping on the platform. He had been marking each confirmation as it came in. He counted. He counted again. He looked up. 26, he said. She didn't respond. He watched her face. There was nothing there that looked like satisfaction, nothing that looked like pride, nothing that looked like the expression a person makes when they have done something extraordinary and they know it. There was only the same focused attention that had been there since she had climbed those stairs and put her cheek on that stock and begun to work. Rachel, he said, 26. I heard you, she said. I know what it is, she said. She was still scanning. Is the convoy mobile? They said they can move. Then we need to keep watching until they're out of the pass, she said. They're not safe until they're out of the pass. He almost said something about the number, something about what she had just done, something that would have been true but would not have helped anything in that moment. He kept it to himself. He put his eye back to the spotting scope. They watched the eastern pass together for another 22 minutes until the convoy's last vehicle cleared the far end and the ridge lines were empty and the radio traffic from the convoy commander had shifted from tight and broken to something that sounded finally like relief. Only then did Rachel Carter push back from the rifle. She sat up. She rolled her shoulders once. She looked at her hands for a moment, not dramatically, not the way someone looks at their hands in a movie when they want you to know something has changed. She looked at them the way you look at a tool you have been using. Hard checking for damage, checking that everything still works. Then she began to break down the rifle. 26, Brooks said again, quietly. He wasn't trying to make a point. He just needed to say it out loud one more time to make it real. Rachel put the first component into the case. There were also 2 wounded soldiers in the convoy that nobody was going to get to in time. She said, I need to get down there with a trauma kit. The convoy is 12 miles out. Then I need to move, she said. That was Rachel Carter. Not the 26, not the machine gun at 890 meters into a crosswind, not the 2 contacts at the base of the tower. She had already moved past all of it, and what was in front of her now was a 19-year-old kid bleeding in the back of a damaged vehicle 12 miles away, and that was what required her attention next. She latched the rifle case. She stood up. She started for the stairs. Ethan Brooks sat on the tower platform for a moment, the spotting scope still in his hands, and looked out at the eastern pass where the last dust of the convoy was still settling back to the valley floor. He had been at Outpost Halcyon for 14 months. He had never seen anything like what he had just seen, and he knew with absolute certainty that neither had anyone else. Down in the operations building, Sergeant Dale Kovac was still at the radio console. The room had gone quieter, the immediate emergency was over, and the adrenaline was wearing off, and people were starting to do the work of processing what had just happened, which was different from person to person, but involved for most of them the same central image, a small woman in a tower with a rifle working through a problem that the rest of the outpost couldn't solve. Garza was looking at the floor. The operations officer was writing in the incident log, his pen moving fast, his handwriting getting worse, the faster he wrote. Kovac was very still. He was thinking about a morning in the motor pool. He was thinking about 11 soldiers and a crowd and a woman sitting on an ammunition crate cleaning her optics. He was thinking about the words he had said and the way he had said them, and the people who had heard them, and the way she had looked at him, not with anger, not with hurt, but with that calm, measuring attention that he now understood was not passivity, had never been passivity, had been from the very first moment the look of someone who already knew something he didn't. He picked up the radio handset. He called the South Watchtower. Brooks answered. "Where is Carter?" Kovac said. "She went to get a trauma kit," Brooks said. "She's heading to meet the convoy." A pause. "Of course she is," Kovac said. He put down the handset. He did not say anything else for a long time. The trauma kit was a green canvas bag that weighed 11 pounds when fully loaded, and Rachel Carter carried it at a dead run to the vehicle bay without stopping to explain herself to anyone. The vehicle bay had one working transport left, a beat-up utility truck that the maintenance crew had been arguing about for 3 weeks because the left rear tire had a slow leak that nobody had properly fixed yet. Rachel got in, started the engine, and drove. Private Garza saw her go from the door of the operations building. He was still holding his notepad from the incident log. He watched the utility truck clear the gate and hit the eastern road, and he thought in the way 19-year-olds think when they've just watched something that rearranged their understanding of the world. She's not done. She was never done. The tower was just one part of it. He went back inside and said nothing. The eastern road to the pass was 12 miles of hard-packed desert surface that felt like 16 when you were pushing a utility truck with a compromised rear tire and a trauma kit rattling around in the back. Rachel drove the way she did everything else efficiently, without wasted motion. Her attention divided in the specific way she had learned to divide it, which meant the road got most of what it needed, and the rest of her mind was already at the convoy. Already running through what she knew from the radio transmissions, multiple wounded, at least one casualty collection point, and a machine gun that had been hitting wounded soldiers before she silenced it. That last fact was the one that kept surfacing. Not as emotion, not yet, not while she was still moving, but as data. The machine gun had been hitting the casualty collection point. That meant the wounded who were already down had taken additional fire. That meant she was driving towards something worse than a standard firefight aftermath. She drove faster. The convoy met her 3 miles short of the pass entrance. The column had gotten mobile but slowly, and 2 vehicles were being towed by a third, and the sight of the column moving toward her instead of being stationary told her something important. The soldiers who could move were moving. The soldiers who couldn't, they were why she was here. She pulled the utility truck off the road and was out with the trauma kit before the engine finished turning over. The convoy commander was a broad-shouldered woman named Captain Ewan, who had blood on her sleeve that was not her own, and whose face had the specific controlled expression of someone who had been holding it together by main force for the past hour and was still holding it, but just barely. She saw Rachel come around the side of the lead vehicle and she stopped. "Carter," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You're the one who—" She stopped. She looked at the trauma kit. She made a decision. "We've got 3 critical in the second vehicle. One's been waiting 20 minutes. He's 19. Took shrapnel, then secondary fragments when the machine gun hit the collection point." "Take me there," Rachel said. Ewan took her there. The second vehicle had its rear doors open, and the inside was not something that Rachel looked at the way a civilian looks at a scene that is difficult. She looked at it the way a trained person looks at a problem, rapidly, systematically establishing priority. 3 wounded. The one in the worst shape was against the left wall, being held by a soldier who had run out of bandages and was using his own shirt pressed hard against a wound site in the young man's upper left chest. The young man was 19. She knew that because Ewan had told her, and because she could see it in his face the way 19 looks when it's scared, which is different from the way 30 looks when it's scared, because at 19 you still believe at some deep cellular level that you are not supposed to be dying, and that belief is written all over you. Rachel dropped to her knees beside him and opened the trauma kit. "What's your name?" she said to him. He looked at her. His eyes were tracking, which was good. "Specialist Danny Reyes," he said. His voice was weak but present. "Danny, I'm Rachel. I'm going to help you. I need you to breathe slow and steady. Can you do that? Yeah, he said. Then are you the one from the tower? She was already working, cutting away the shirt the other soldier had been using, assessing the wound, moving with the same economy of motion that characterized everything she did. I'm from the tower, she said. I heard them say your name, he said. Over the radio, I heard them say Carter. Don't talk, she said. Breathe. You saved us, he said. She pressed a hemostatic dressing into the wound site and applied pressure with both hands, and her face did not change. She did not stop working. But something moved through her in that moment, not satisfaction, not pride, not the feeling she was supposed to feel, something quieter and heavier, something that was about the distance between what she had done in the tower and what was in front of her now, and the fact that those two things were not separate. They were the same thing. They had always been the same thing. Breathe, Danny, she said. He breathed, she worked. Captain Ewan stood at the vehicle doors, watching, and at some point she had stopped watching the wound and started watching Rachel, and what she saw was a woman who moved between the two injured soldiers without hesitation, without the slight delay that even experienced trauma care personnel show when they're processing the severity of what they're looking at. Rachel processed and moved simultaneously. And the efficiency of it was remarkable enough that Ewan later mentioned it in her official account of the engagement, which was a document that contained a great deal of remarkable information and still found space for this specific detail. The third wounded soldier, a corporal named Fishman, who had a through-and-through gunshot wound in his right leg and had been keeping himself conscious by talking to the soldier next to him, looked at Rachel as she moved to him after stabilizing Reyes. You're a medic, he said. Medical support, she said. Combat medic qualified. And you're a sniper. Long-range marksman, she said. Hold still. That's the same thing. It's not technically. Lady Fishman said, and his voice had the slightly delirious edge that people get when they've been bleeding long enough that the pain starts to blur at the edges. You just took out 26 people from a tower at a kilometer. You can call yourself whatever you want. Rachel said nothing. She was irrigating the wound entry point, checking for debris, beginning the process of stabilization that would get him to an actual surgical facility where someone with better tools and more time could do what she couldn't do on the back of a truck. Ewan was still watching from the doorway. She had been on the radio for the past several minutes coordinating the medevac that was now inbound, and she had one ear on that conversation and one ear on what was happening in the back of the vehicle. And she was doing the kind of rapid-fire assessment that good commanders do continuously, not just of the tactical situation, but of the people in it. What she was assessing watching Rachel work was something she had not expected to assess today. She had expected to assess damage losses, unit cohesion, command decisions, and their consequences. She had not expected to end this day thinking about what she was going to put in a specific section of her report. But she was thinking about it now, and the thought was unambiguous. This woman should not be logging training scores. The medevac arrived 41 minutes after Rachel reached the convoy. Danny Reyes was loaded first. He was conscious. His color was bad, but better than it had been 20 minutes earlier, which was the difference between someone who had lost too much blood before help arrived and someone who had lost a significant amount of blood but had help arrive in time. Rachel had made that difference. She had made it with her hands and her training and the 11-pound trauma kit she had carried to a utility truck with a bad rear tire and driven 12 miles on a desert road. As they loaded him onto the medevac, Reyes looked back at her. Carter, he said. Rest, she said. I'm going to tell everybody, he said. What you did, both things, I'm going to tell everybody. She watched the medevac lift. She stood there in the rotor wash with dust going everywhere and her arms at her sides, and she watched until the aircraft was clear of the ridgeline, and then she turned back to the convoy. Ewan was standing 5 feet away. I need a statement from you, Ewan said, for the incident report. Yes, ma'am. Not now, when we're back at Halcyon. Yes, ma'am. Ewan looked at her for a moment. The controlled expression was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. How long have you been at Halcyon? She said. 41 days, ma'am. And Kovac had you on inventory rotation. It was not a question. Rachel said, yes, ma'am. Ewan looked at her for another moment. Then she said, get in the truck. I want you back at the outpost before the debrief. Rachel got in the truck. The drive back was quieter than the drive out. The adrenaline had settled into something flatter. Not exhaustion exactly, but the specific weight that comes after a period of intense focus when the focus is no longer required, and your body has to figure out what to do with everything it was carrying. Rachel felt it in her hands mostly. A slight tremor barely perceptible that she recognized as the normal biological consequence of what the past few hours had asked of her nervous system. She held the steering wheel at 10 and 2 and drove steadily and let the tremor be there without fighting it. She thought about Danny Reyes. She thought about his face, the 19-year-old certainty that he was not supposed to be dying, the way he had looked at her when she said she was from the tower, the way he said you saved us, with the same matter-of-fact directness that soldiers use when they want to say something true and don't have the energy to dress it up. She had not cried in the vehicle, and she did not cry now. She was not built for crying in motion. What she felt was something more like gravity, a heaviness that was not grief and was not relief, but was somewhere between them, the specific weight of having moved through something that mattered and come out the other side carrying the knowledge of what it cost. 26 targets from the tower, 3 wounded soldiers stabilized, 1 machine gun silenced at 890 meters in a crosswind, and she was driving back to an outpost where her official assignment was logging inventory. She let herself feel the absurdity of that for exactly 1 mile. Then she let it go. Because feeling it didn't change it, and what would change it was not emotion but evidence. And the evidence had been generated today in a way that could not be undone. What happened next would happen in the ways that institutional things happen slowly through official channels, with the specific friction that organizations generate when they are being asked to correct something they did wrong. It would not be fast. It would not be graceful. But it would happen. She was sure of that. She pulled the utility truck through the gate at Outpost Halcyon at 1417. Ethan Brooks was waiting at the vehicle bay. He had the spotting scope in one hand, and the look on his face that people get when they've been holding something in for long enough that it's written all over them whether they want it to be or not. He watched her get out of the truck. He looked at her hands. The blood on them was minimal. She had gloved up before she worked on Reyes, but her forearms had caught some of it. He looked at her face. Reyes, he said. Medevac took him, she said. He's got a good chance. Brooks let out a breath. And Fishman, stable, he'll keep the leg. Good, he paused. That's good. She was moving past him toward the supply bay to return the trauma kit. He fell in beside her. Kovac wants to see you, he said. She kept walking. Now he's been waiting. He told me to bring you to the operations building as soon as you got back. I need to log the trauma kit first. Rachel, it takes 2 minutes, she said. The supplies need to be accounted for. That's how it works. He looked at her sideways. Even now, even after everything that had happened today, she was going to log the trauma kit before she went to see the man who had humiliated her in front of the entire unit because that was the correct order of operations. And she did not deviate from the correct order of operations regardless of what else was happening. He almost laughed. He caught it before it came out and turned it into something that was not quite a smile. 2 minutes, he said. 2 minutes, she confirmed. It was actually 4 minutes because the supply log had an entry that didn't match what was physically in the kit. Someone had used a bandage from it without recording it, which was the kind of small administrative failure that happened constantly and that Rachel had been flagging in her inventory reports for 6 weeks without seeing any change. She noted the discrepancy corrected, the log replaced the missing item from reserve stock, and then set the kit back in its designated position on the shelf. Then she went to the operations building. The operations building at Outpost Halcyon was not a large space. It had a radio console, 3 workstations, a large printed map on the north wall, and a door to a smaller back room that served as the operations officer's office. When Rachel walked in, the main room had 4 people in it, the operations officer, 2 communication specialists, and Private Garza, who was still holding a notepad and appeared to have been standing in approximately the same spot since morning. Kovac was in the back room. The operations officer looked at Rachel when she came in. He looked at her in a way that was different from how he had looked at her any previous time she had been in this building, which had been several times for inventory coordination. The previous looks had been perfunctory. She was a logistical asset. She was providing information. The interaction could be completed in under a minute. This look was different. This look had recognition in it and something that might have been discomfort and something that might have been respect, and it was doing all 3 things at once in a way that made his face slightly uncertain. He's in the back, the operations officer said. I know, Rachel said. Thank you. She knocked on the door. Kovac said, come in. She came in. The back room was small. Kovac was sitting behind the desk that served as the operations officer's workspace when the main room was crowded, and he looked like a man who had been sitting in that chair for a while and had not found it comfortable in any of the ways that mattered. He had his hands flat on the desk in front of him. His face had the same controlled expression. It always had the expression she had cataloged in the motor pool that morning 41 days ago. The expression she had measured and filed away. But the eyes were different. She had known they would be different. Sit down, Carter, he said. She sat. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, how's Reyes? Medevac took him. The medic on the aircraft said his vitals were stable by the time they loaded him. Fishman kept his leg. Kovac nodded. He looked at his hands. He said, the convoy commander is going to put in a full incident report. Your engagement from the tower is going in as a separate attachment. 26 confirmed. Yes, Sergeant. +2 at close range at the base of the tower. Yes, he nodded again. Another silence longer this time. Rachel waited. She was good at waiting. She had been waiting for 41 days. I want to ask you something, Kovac said, and I want you to answer me straight. Always, she said. He looked up at her. When you were logging inventory 3 days ago, did you know about the pass? She held his gaze. I had concerns. Concerns. He repeated the word in a tone that was not quite flat and not quite anything else. What kind of concerns? I had been studying the ridge lines from the South Watchtower for several weeks, she said. The North Ridge has 3 natural positions that would allow suppressive fire in any vehicle column in the pass. The South Ridge has better cover for the shooter. Whoever planned that ambush put their better people on the south side. I noticed elevated thermal signatures on the North Ridge in the sensor log 2 nights before the convoy mission. Kovac was very still. You checked the sensor logs. I was at the operations building at 0300 for an inventory verification, she said. The logs were on the duty desk. And you said nothing. I had no standing to say anything, she said. You had made that clear. The silence that followed was one of the heaviest silences Rachel Carter had ever sat inside. She watched Kovac's face process what she had said, not just the information, but the full weight of it. That she had known. That she had been watching. That she had said nothing because he had taken away the standing she would have needed to be heard. That 22 soldiers had driven into that pass because she had no standing. She watched him carry that. She did not help him carry it. It was his to carry. Why didn't you go around me, he said finally, to the operations officer, to command? Because I had no proof, she said. I had observations. I had instinct. I had 17 nights of data that wasn't in any official log. If I had gone to the operations officer, the first thing he would have done was ask you whether my concerns had merit. And you would have said no. He didn't deny it. That was something. It was not enough, but it was something. 22 soldiers went into that pass, he said. His voice had changed, not softer, but more stripped down, like he had removed the layer of authority from it, and what was left was just a man talking. And you knew it might be a problem. I hoped I was wrong, she said, but you prepared anyway. I always prepare, she said. That's what I do. He looked at her across the desk. She looked back at him. And in that moment, in that small back room with the radio noise coming through the wall, in the late afternoon heat pressing down on the whole outpost, something passed between them that was not forgiveness and was not reconciliation and was not the neat resolution that people who have not been in those situations imagine for moments like this. It was something more honest than any of those things. It was 2 people looking at each other and understanding exactly what had happened and exactly what it had cost, with no comfortable story to put around it. Kovac said, I'm going to recommend a role change, formally. Through command, long-range support, primary assignment, effective immediately. Thank you, Rachel said. I should have looked at your actual scores, he said, before I said what I said. She said nothing. She let that sit where he put it. I'm going to say that, he said, in front of the unit. What I said in the motor pool, I'm going to address it. She looked at him steadily. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to, he said. That's why I'm going to. Outside the back room, Garza had moved slightly closer to the door. Not close enough to be obviously listening, close enough that he could hear if the voices carried. They carried. He heard Carter say, understood. Just that. Not thank you. Not I appreciate that. Not the words that would have indicated she needed the gesture. Just understood. As if she had received a piece of information and filed it away. Garza thought about the motor pool that morning. The morning that was now several lifetimes ago. And he thought about the way she had said that same word then in the same tone, and he realized that it was not the same word at all. The first time it had been a woman acknowledging that she had heard what was said to her and would carry it alone. The second time it was something different. It was a woman receiving something that was owed without making it larger than it was. He went back to his notepad. He wrote understood. He looked at it for a moment. Then he wrote underneath it. She was the truth the whole time. He wasn't sure why he wrote that. He wasn't a person who wrote things like that. But it was the thing that was true, and it was sitting in front of him, and he wrote it down. In the back room, Kovac said, "Dismissed Carter." Rachel stood. She straightened. She moved to the door. "Carter," Kovac said. She stopped. "The shot on the machine gun," he said. 890 meters, into that crosswind. He paused. "How?" She thought about it for a moment. She thought about Montana. She thought about cold hillsides and an old man standing 50 meters behind her in the 2-second window when the wind layers equalize and the world goes briefly perfectly still. "My grandfather taught me," she said. He said, "Find the moment when everything stops fighting. It's always there. You just have to wait for it." Kovac looked at her. "He sounds like he was good," he said. "He was the best I ever saw," she said. She opened the door. She walked back through the operations building past the radio console and the workstations and the map on the north wall, and Private Garza with his notepad. She walked out into the late afternoon heat of the desert. She walked across the open ground toward the supply bay where her official duties were logged and her inventory sheets were stacked, and her name appeared on the roster under a designation that was about to change. She walked steadily. She did not look back. The formal debrief happened the next morning at 0800. Captain Yuen ran it herself, which was the first signal to everyone in the room that this was not going to be a standard after-action review. Standard after-action reviews at Outpost Halcyon were run by the operations officer, a competent but unflashy man named Lieutenant Doss, who had a methodical approach to documentation and a deep commitment to finishing before lunch. When Yuen walked in at 0758, with a manila folder and the expression of someone who had been awake since 0400 thinking about exactly what she was going to say, Doss quietly moved to the side of the room and stayed there. 14 soldiers were present. Rachel Carter sat in the second row between Brooks and a communications specialist named Pacheco, who had been monitoring the radio during the engagement and had heard every transmission from the convoy and from the tower and had not said a single word about any of it since it happened, which Pacheco would later explain by saying some things you need time to sit with before you can talk about them. He had needed time. Kovac sat in the front row. He had chosen the front row deliberately, which was not where senior NCOs typically sat in a debrief. Senior NCOs typically positioned themselves at the side or the back where they could observe the room. Kovac sitting in the front row meant he was not positioning himself to observe. He was positioning himself to be observed, and everyone in the room noticed it, and nobody said anything about it. Yuen opened the folder. She did not begin with the ambush. She began with the timeline which started at 0600 when the convoy rolled out and ended at 1522 when the last wounded soldier was loaded onto the medevac. She went through it chronologically, factually, without editorial comment, and she went through it slowly enough that everyone in the room had to sit with each piece of it. The vehicles destroyed in the first 4 minutes, the pinned soldiers, the ridgeline positions, the artillery unavailability, the QRF timeline. The moment when command identified that the only viable asset was a long-range rifle at Outpost Halcyon. She paused at that point. At 14 minutes past initial contact, she said, the decision was made to deploy Sergeant Carter to the South Watchtower. She looked up from the folder. I want to be precise about something. The decision at that point was not whether Carter was qualified. The qualification scores are in this folder, and they are unambiguous. The decision was whether the outpost designated long-range asset was going to be used. She paused again. Sergeant Carter was the outpost designated long-range asset. She had been that asset since her assignment to Halcyon. She should have been integrated into the outpost defensive planning from the first week. The room was quiet. Ewan looked at Kovac. Kovac looked back at her. He did not look away. She was not integrated into defensive planning, Ewan said. That is a command failure, and it is documented as such in my report. She closed the folder. What I am going to say next is also in the report, and I am saying it here because I believe the people in this room need to hear it directly, not read it later in a document. She let that sit for a moment. In a 47-minute engagement from a fixed position at the South Watchtower, Sergeant Carter neutralized 26 hostile targets across 2 ridgelines at ranges between 700 and 900 meters. She eliminated a crew-served machine gun at 890 meters under significant crosswind conditions that would have challenged a shooter with twice her operational experience. She transitioned to close-range defense of her position without breaking the engagement, and she reached the convoy immediately after the engagement concluded and provided trauma care that contributed directly to the survival of at least one critically wounded soldier. Nobody moved. That is the record, Ewan said. That is what this unit has in its record now. And I want everyone in this room to understand what that record means, not just as a number, but as a statement about what was present here and how it was being used. She picked up the folder again. Sergeant Carter, she said. Rachel said, ma'am. Your assignment is being formally restructured effective today. Primary role long-range support specialist integrated into all defensive planning and convoy support operations. The change is being submitted through command this morning with my full recommendation. Yes, ma'am, Rachel said. Thank you. Don't thank me, Ewan said. This should have happened 41 days ago. The room remained quiet. Then Pacheco, who had said nothing about any of it for 20 hours, said very quietly to the person sitting next to him, 41 days. Not as a question, just as a fact he was making real by saying out loud. After the debrief, the room cleared in the way rooms clear, after something significant. Slowly people moving at different speeds, some needing a moment, some needing air, some needing to talk, and some needing the opposite. Brooks waited until most people had filed out and then fell in beside Rachel as she moved toward the door. How are you? He said. Fine, she said. That's not what I asked. She glanced at him. I know what you asked. They were out the door and into the morning heat before she said anything else. Then she said, I keep thinking about the thermal signatures. 2 nights before. Brooks looked at her. You did everything you could. I could have pushed harder, she said. I could have found a way. You didn't have standing. You said that yourself. Standing is something you either take or you're given, she said. I waited to be given it. Maybe I should have taken it. Brooks was quiet for a moment. And if you'd gone to DOS, gone around Kovac, and Kovac had shut it down, and Ewan had backed Kovac and the convoy went out anyway. She didn't answer. You made the call that you made, Brooks said. And when they needed you, you were ready. That's the thing that actually happened. Reyes almost died, she said. 20 minutes longer, and it would have been different. But it wasn't 20 minutes longer, Brooks said, because you were already moving. She stopped walking. She looked at him. He was 22 years old and had been in the Army for 14 months and had sat in a tower with her for 19 nights calling wind data and confirming targets. And he was telling her something that was true in a way she needed to hear from outside herself. She said, you're going to be good at this, Brooks. He blinked. At what? Whatever you do, she said. You pay attention to the right things. He looked at her for a moment and then looked away because the compliment had landed somewhere he wasn't quite ready for it. Don't get sentimental on me, he said. I'm not sentimental, she said. I'm accurate. She started walking again. He walked beside her. What neither of them said and both of them knew was that the dynamic between them had shifted in some way that was permanent. They had sat in a tower together in the middle of an active firefight and done something that required absolute trust in the other person's competence and judgment, and they had both delivered on that trust, and you cannot go back from that. You can move forward from it in all kinds of directions, but you cannot go back to what you were before. They were something different now, something that didn't have a neat name, but was real and durable and would matter. 2 hours later, the document came through. It was the formal reassignment order signed by Ewan and submitted through command, and it arrived at the outpost operations desk at 10:43 in the morning. Doss printed it, looked at it, and carried it to the supply bay, where Rachel was still completing her morning inventory, because the inventory had to be completed regardless of what else was happening, and she was going to complete it. He handed her the paper. She read it. She set it on the shelf beside the supply log. She picked up the supply log and made the next entry. Doss watched her. "You're going to finish the inventory." "I'm in the middle of it," she said. "Your whole role just changed." "The inventory still needs to be finished," she said. "Someone has to do it." He stood there for another moment. "Carter," he said. She looked up. "For what it's worth," he said. "I reviewed your qualification file this morning. The scores go back 3 years. I should have looked at that file 41 days ago." She held his gaze. "Yes, sir," she said. "You should have." It was not said with anger. It was said with the same factual directness she brought to everything, and Doss received it the way it was delivered, as information accurate and unembellished. He nodded. He left. She finished the inventory. What happened next was a thing that nobody had explicitly planned, but that became in the telling of the story afterward, the moment that people pointed to when they tried to explain what kind of person Sergeant Dale Kovac actually was underneath the persona he had built. At 1300 hours, he called a unit formation, not a scheduled formation, an unscheduled one, which at Outpost Halcyon was uncommon enough to generate immediate curiosity and mild anxiety in equal measure. Soldiers assembled in the motor pool, the same motor pool where 43 days ago he had stood in front of 11 men and dismantled a woman's credibility in 4 sentences. Rachel was in the formation. She stood where she stood in formation's 3rd row, left side exactly where her height put her when the unit organized by standard protocol. She had not been told what this formation was about. Nobody had. Kovac stood in front of them. He looked at the assembled soldiers for a moment. His posture was the same as always, straight solid, the physical vocabulary of authority. But something in his face was doing something different, and the soldiers who had served with him 4 years and knew his face well enough to read it were picking that up and exchanging small glances. He said, 43 days ago, I stood in this motor pool and I publicly questioned whether Sergeant Carter had any business being assigned to a long-range rifle." He paused. "I did that in front of most of you. I want to address it in front of most of you." The motor pool went very quiet. "I made that assessment based on what I saw when I looked at her," Kovac said. "I did not look at her record. I did not look at her qualification scores, which are the highest in this unit and among the highest I have seen in 22 years of service. I looked at her and I made a judgment that had nothing to do with her actual capability, and I was wrong." He stopped. He let that sit. "Yesterday, Sergeant Carter held the South Watchtower for 47 minutes and neutralized 26 hostile targets. She protected the convoy. She saved lives. She did this while I was in the operations building running the numbers and understanding that the only asset I had that could reach those ridgelines was the person I had moved to inventory duty." Another pause. "I want every person in this formation to understand what that means. It means my mistake had operational consequences. It means people were in more danger than they needed to be because I did not assess correctly." Nobody in the formation moved. "I am saying this here," Kovac continued, "because I said the other thing here, and because the record should be set straight in the same place it was made wrong." He looked at Rachel directly. "Sergeant Carter, I misjudged your capability. I dismissed your potential based on things that had nothing to do with your actual performance. That was wrong, and I am saying so." Rachel looked back at him. The motor pool waited. She said, "Understood, Sergeant." And just like before, just like in the back room the previous evening, just like in the motor pool 43 days ago, she said it without anger and without grace offering, and without any of the softening language that would have made it easier for him. She said it as a receipt. She had heard what he said. She had recorded it. It was now part of the record. Ferris, who was standing 2 people to Kovac's left, and who had been the first to laugh 43 days ago, was looking at his boots. Garza, who had stayed in the motor pool after the formation was called, instead of going back inside to his notepad, was looking at Rachel. He was watching her face. He was looking for something, vindication maybe, or some small, visible satisfaction, some flicker of the feeling that the moment seemed to deserve. He didn't find it. What he found was exactly what had always been their attention. Quiet, steady, total attention to what was in front of her, without decoration, without performance. He looked down at his notepad. She was the truth the whole time he had written. He still believed it. He believed it more now, not less, because what he was watching was the completion of a proof. 43 days of evidence concluded, and she was receiving the conclusion the same way she had received every piece of data that came before it by looking at it directly, acknowledging it, and continuing. Kovac dismissed the formation. Soldiers dispersed. The motor pool noise came back up, metal on metal, boots on gravel. Someone somewhere dropping something heavy and swearing about it. The sounds of a functioning outpost returning to function. Brooks appeared at Rachel's shoulder. "You okay?" he said. "I keep getting asked that today," she said. "Probably because people are worried about you." "Tell them not to worry," she said. "I'm fine." "Are you actually fine, or are you fine the way you're always fine, which is a different thing?" She looked at him sideways. "When did you get philosophical?" "Around the 19th night in the tower," he said. "You do that to people." She almost smiled. It was small, barely there, a movement at the corner of her mouth that lasted about a second and then was gone. But Brooks saw it and filed it away because Rachel Carter, almost smiling, was rare enough to be worth remembering. "I'm fine," she said. "Really, what Kovac did, that took something. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. But the thing that needed to change was the role," she said. "The apology is it's right, it's correct. But what matters is where I'm assigned tomorrow morning. That's the thing that changes what happens next." "And where are you assigned tomorrow morning?" "South Watchtower," she said. "First rotation." He nodded. "I'll be there." "I know," she said. That afternoon, word came through from the medical facility where Danny Reyes had been taken. He was out of surgery. He was stable. The surgical team had noted that the initial trauma care he had received in the field had significantly improved his outcome. The hemostatic dressing application had been textbook, and the decision to stabilize before transport, rather than attempting to move him immediately, had been correct and had probably saved his life. The word came through Doss, who printed it and carried it to Rachel with the same quiet efficiency he had carried the reassignment order. She read it. She read it twice. She folded it and put it in the breast pocket of her uniform. Doss waited. "Thank you," she said. "He's asking about you," Doss said. "Reyes, he asked the attending nurse to pass along a message." She looked up. "He said, tell her I meant what I said. I'm going to tell everybody." Rachel looked at Doss for a moment. She looked at the breast pocket where she had put the folded paper. She looked at the supply shelf in front of her, which was perfectly organized and fully logged, and required nothing further from her at this moment. "Tell him to rest," she said. "I'll pass it along," Doss said. He left. Rachel stood alone in the supply bay for exactly 90 seconds. She stood still in a way that was different from her professional stillness. Not the stillness of calculation or preparation, but something more fundamental. The stillness of a person who has put down something very heavy and is taking the moment to notice that it is no longer in their arms. Then she picked up the next item on her work list, which was a maintenance log for the medical equipment in Bay 3, and she started working through it. Because the work was always there, and the work was what she did. Outside the supply bay, the outpost was doing what outposts do in the hours after something significant, settling back into routine, finding the rhythm of ordinary days, letting the extraordinary recede into the category of things that happened and are now part of the record. Soldiers talked about it in the mess and in the vehicle bay and in the quieter corners of the barracks. They talked about the 47 minutes. They talked about the machine gun at 890 meters. They talked about the 2 contacts at the base of the tower, which had circulated through the unit in the way things circulate when they are both shocking and clarifying. Some of them talked about the motor pool 43 days ago. They talked about it differently now than they would have talked about it then. Some of them were honest about what they had done, the laughing, the silence that was as loud as laughing the 1,000 small ways a group of people can tell one person that they do not belong. Some of them were less honest in the way that people are less honest when the honest version reflects badly on them. Ferris did not talk about it. He found Brooks in the vehicle bay at 1500 hours. Brooks was running a cable check on the spotting scope, which didn't particularly need a cable check, but which gave him something to do with his hands while the day finished settling. Ferris stood there for a moment. Then he said, "I was the first one to laugh." Brooks looked at him. "In the motor pool," Ferris said, "when Kovac said the thing about the long rifle, I was the first one to laugh." "I know," Brooks said. "I was there." Ferris looked at the scope in Brooks's hands. "I didn't know," he said, "about her scores, about any of it." "You could have known," Brooks said, "not unkindly, just factually." Ferris was quiet. "Yeah," he said, I could have. He walked away. Brooks watched him go. He thought about Rachel in the supply bay finishing her work list. He thought about the 19 nights in the tower and the first conversation and the way she had said, "Anger is noise, I don't carry noise." He thought about what it cost to not carry noise when the noise was that loud. He thought she might be the strongest person he had ever met, and that the particular kind of strength she had was the kind that was hardest to recognize from the outside because it didn't look like what people expected strength to look like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't visible. It was a woman on an ammunition crate cleaning her optics while someone publicly dismissed her and filing away what that dismissal told her and continuing to prepare and being exactly where she needed to be when the moment came. It was the truth the whole time. Garza had written that. Brooks thought Garza was right. At 1700 hours, Rachel Carter completed her work list, signed off on the supply log, and walked to the South Watchtower. Not for a night session, not for practice. She climbed the stairs to the top of the tower and stood at the forward wall and looked out at the eastern pass in the late afternoon light. The ridge lines were empty. The pass was quiet. Somewhere 12 miles out, the valley road showed the marks of yesterday's scorched ground debris that hadn't been cleared yet, the physical evidence of 47 minutes that would stay in the record long after the ground was clean. She looked at the north ridge. She looked at the south ridge. She looked at the northwest position where the machine gun had been, and she thought about the 2-second window when the wind layers had equalized and the world had gone briefly perfectly still. And she had been ready for that window because she had been watching everything that was moving and everything that wasn't moving but was about to. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about cold hillsides and the word he used for the perfect shot. That's the one. She stood in the tower until the sun moved low enough to change the color of the valley, and then she came down the stairs and she went to dinner and she ate and she slept. Tomorrow she had a new assignment. She was going to be ready for it. She was always ready. The first morning of her new assignment, Rachel Carter was at the South Watchtower at 0545. Not 0600, which was when her new rotation officially started. 0545 because she had things to check before the rotation began. The scope calibration, the wind data from the overnight sensor log, the thermal signature report from the north and south ridge lines. She had requested access to the sensor logs as part of her new role, and DOS had approved it within an hour of the reassignment order coming through, which told her something about how quickly the institutional arithmetic had shifted. Brooks arrived at 0558. He climbed the stairs and found her already positioned data card in hand going through numbers with the focused efficiency of someone who had already been working for 15 minutes. "You couldn't sleep," he said. "I slept fine," she said. "I just had things to check." He sat down with the spotting scope and started his own setup. "Anything on the sensors?" "Clean," she said. "Both ridges. North Pass is quiet." "Good. Good for today," she said. "Not good as a permanent condition. We need to establish a regular monitoring protocol. Every night, not just when someone happens to check. Are you going to propose that?" "I already wrote it up," she said. "I'm sending it to DOS this morning." Brooks looked at her. She had written a protocol proposal before her first official day in the new role had technically begun. He was not surprised. He was also not going to say he was not surprised because she would tell him there was nothing to be surprised about, which was true, and also slightly maddening in the way that things are maddening when they are completely correct. "You wrote it last night," he said. "After dinner," she said. "It took about 40 minutes. He got the scope oriented. He read the first wind data of the morning. He called it out. She recorded it. The routine established itself in the easy practice way of two people who had done this enough times that the mechanics were automatic and all the attention could go to what the mechanics were in service of. That was the first morning. Over the next 3 weeks, there were many more mornings like it, and they were all different and all the same. And the cumulative effect of them was something that spread outward through the outpost in a way that nobody explicitly directed, but that everyone eventually felt. Rachel Carter was for the first time since her arrival at Halcyon visible. Not visible the way she had been visible in the motor pool that morning, visible as a target, as the subject of a joke, as the smallest person in the room that someone had decided to make smaller. Visible in the correct way, the way that capability becomes visible when it is allowed to operate in the open. Soldiers started coming to her with questions, not about medical supplies or inventory, about shooting, about wind reading, about position selection and range estimation and the specific kind of patience that long-range work required. They came quietly, usually one at a time, usually with a slightly tentative approach of people who weren't sure how the conversation was going to go. Every one of them got a straight answer. No performance, no inflation, no version of the conversation that was designed to make her look impressive. Just information accurate and applicable delivered with the same economy she brought to everything. Word travels in small outposts. By the end of the second week, Specialist Ferris, the first one who had laughed in the motor pool, the one who had found Brooks in the vehicle bay and said I was the first one to laugh, had come to Rachel with a question about trigger control that he had been doing wrong for 2 years. He had been told by multiple people that his technique was fine. It was not fine. It was causing him to pull shots left at anything past 500 meters, and he had compensated by adjusting his aim point rather than fixing the underlying problem. Rachel fixed the underlying problem in one session. Ferris stood at the range afterward looking at his target and said nothing for a long time. Then he said 2 years. The adjustment you were making felt correct, she said. That's why it's stuck. If someone had caught that at the beginning, yes, she said, they should have. He looked at her. She was already preparing for the next drill, her attention forward on the work. I'm sorry, he said, for the motor pool. She looked at him. I know, she said. Not, it's okay. Not, don't worry about it. Not the softening language that would have let him put it down easily. Just, I know. She had known since the moment he came to her with the question. The question itself was the apology. Everything else was vocabulary. He understood that. He nodded. He went back to the drill. 3 weeks after the engagement, the official incident report was finalized and submitted through command. It was 17 pages long. Rachel's engagement from the tower occupied 6 of those pages and included a technical appendix that Brooks had contributed documenting wind conditions, range estimates, and the decision-making sequence at each engagement point. The appendix was precise and exhaustive and read like the work of someone who had been paying very close attention to something extraordinary. Because he had been. The report went up the chain, and then 12 days after it went up the chain, something happened that nobody at Outpost Halcyon had been expecting. A vehicle arrived from Regional Command, not a supply vehicle, not a standard rotation transport, a clean vehicle carrying 2 officers who were not assigned to Halcyon and who moved through the outpost with the specific, purposeful efficiency of people who are there for a reason and know exactly what the reason is. The senior of the 2 was a colonel named Whitmore. Rachel was in the tower when the vehicle arrived. She saw it come through the gate from her position. She registered it, noted the rank insignia visible through the scope, and went back to her scan of the North Ridge Line because the North Ridge Line required attention regardless of who was visiting. Brooks was beside her. He had also seen the vehicle. That's a full colonel, he said. I know, she said. Coming from Regional. I know. Rachel. Brooks, what would you like me to do about it? Stop watching the ridge. He looked at the ridge. No, he said. Then let me watch the ridge. He let her watch the ridge. Colonel Whitmore spent 40 minutes with Captain Yuen in the operations building. Nobody outside that room knew what was said in those 40 minutes. But the operations officer, Doss, who had been in the room for the first 10 minutes before Yuen had asked him to step out, said afterward that the conversation had begun with the incident report in the technical appendix and had moved very quickly into territory that he would describe only as significant. When Whitmore came out of the operations building, he asked to go to the South Watchtower. Yuen brought him. Rachel heard boots on the stairs, more than one set, and she tracked them without looking away from the ridge. She knew Yuen's step by now. The second set was heavier, deliberate, the walk of someone senior who was accustomed to walking into rooms and having the room adjust to them. Whitmore came onto the platform. He looked at Rachel. He looked at the rifle. He looked at the position she had established on the forward wall. He looked at Brooks's spotting setup. Sergeant Carter, he said. Sir, she said. She did not move from her position. She would not move from her position during an active scan unless ordered to, and Whitmore, she could see this immediately, was not a man who would want her to move. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something when he is confirming what a report told him and finding the report accurate. At ease, he said. I'm not here for protocol. I'm here to look at this position and talk to the person who held it. Yes, sir, she said. He moved to the forward wall beside her. He looked out at the eastern pass. He was quiet for a moment. The technical appendix, he said. Your spotter wrote it. Yes, sir, Specialist Brooks. It's the most detailed engagement documentation I've read in 11 years, Whitmore said, and I've read a lot of them. Brooks from behind the spotting scope said nothing. His ears were red. Whitmore looked at the North Ridge. Walk me through it, he said. The machine gun, 890 meters. Rachel kept her eyes on the current scan. She talked. She talked through it the way she talked through everything without drama, without the storytelling inflation that turns a difficult shot into a legend in the retelling. She described the wind conditions, the layering she and Brooks had identified, the decision to wait for the equalization window, the trigger break. She described it as a technical problem that had been solved through the correct application of available information. Whitmore listened. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your grandfather was a hunter." She looked at him then. "Sir, Bush, it's in your personnel file," he said. "The background interview. You said your long-range training came from your grandfather." "Yes, sir." "Montana." "Yes, sir." He looked back at the ridge. "My father hunted elk," he said. "Not at your grandfather's level, I'm sure. But I grew up with a version of what you're describing. The patience, the reading of things that aren't obvious." He paused. "It doesn't come from a range," he said. "You know that." "Yes, sir," she said. "It doesn't come from a range." He nodded. He stayed on the tower for another 10 minutes asking questions that were specific and technical, and that Rachel answered with the same accuracy she brought to everything. Then he thanked her. He thanked Brooks. He went back down the stairs. Rachel watched the North Ridge. Brooks waited until Whitmore's footsteps had cleared the base of the tower. "What just happened?" he said. "A colonel from Regional came to look at the position." She said, "That's not all that happened." "No," she said. "Probably not." She did not elaborate because she did not know yet, and speculating about what she did not know was not something she did. She would know when she knew. Until then, there was the ridge. She watched the ridge. What she found out 4 days later was this: Colonel Whitmore had returned to Regional Command and submitted a supplementary memorandum to the incident report. The memorandum was 4 paragraphs long. It recommended that Rachel Carter's engagement be formally recognized at the command level. It recommended that the protocol failures identified in UN's report, specifically the non-integration of a qualified long-range asset into defensive planning, be used as a case study in a command leadership training module that Whitmore was personally overseeing. And it recommended in the final paragraph that Sergeant Rachel Carter be considered for a specialized long-range support program that operated at the regional level and that very few people at an outpost like Halcyon had ever heard of. Ewan told her personally. She called Rachel to the operations building at 1400, closed the door to the back room, and laid the memorandum on the desk between them. Rachel read it. She read it twice. She looked up. "This is a significant opportunity," Ewan said. "It would take you off Halcyon. The program is based out of Regional. It's small, 12 personnel total. The focus is exactly what you demonstrated in the tower." "When would the transfer happen?" Rachel said. "That's up to you to some extent. Whitmore has given you flexibility on timing." He said, and I am quoting directly, he said, "Don't rush her. Someone who waits for the right window knows the value of timing." Rachel looked at the memorandum again. She thought about Brooks. She thought about the protocol proposal she had submitted, which Doss had approved and which was now part of the outpost's standard operating procedure. She thought about Ferris and his trigger control. She thought about the 19 nights in the tower and everything they had built, the two of them in the dark, in the wind, and the patience of it. She thought about Danny Reyes. She had received a letter from him 10 days after the engagement, handwritten 3 pages long, and she had read it once and put it in the same breast pocket where she had put the folded medical update, and she had not read it again. Not because it wasn't important, because it was very important, and some things you hold carefully by not handling them too often. He had written, "I told my mother about you. I told her everything. She wants me to tell you that she lights a candle for you every morning. I said I didn't know if you were the kind of person who would want someone lighting a candle for you. She said it doesn't matter what kind of person you are. Some things you do for someone because of what they did not, because of what they want." Rachel had thought about that for a long time. She was thinking about it now. "How long do I have to decide?" she said. Whitmore said 2 weeks, Ewan said. "But Rachel, this is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice." "I know," Rachel said. "I'll have an answer in 48 hours. Ewan looked at her. Not 2 weeks. I know what I need to know, Rachel said. I just need to sit with it for 48 hours. She stood. Can I ask you something? Ewan said. Rachel waited. Back in the convo, Ewan said, when I found you working on Reyes, you had just come down from 47 minutes in that tower. 26 confirmed, and you drove 12 miles in a truck with a bad tire to reach him. She paused. How do you hold both of those things, the tower and the truck? How does that live in the same person? Rachel was quiet for a moment. My grandfather used to say the rifle is a tool, and the medicine is a tool, and the patience is a tool, she said. The person is not the tool. The person decides what the moment needs. She looked at Ewan steadily. Yesterday, the moment needed the tower. Then it needed the truck. I just went where the moment needed me to go. Ewan looked at her for a long time. Get out of my office, Carter, she said. Not unkindly. The way you say something when you've heard something true and you need a moment alone with it. Rachel got out. The 48 hours were not dramatic. She did her rotations. She submitted 2 additional protocol refinements to DOS because the first proposal had identified gaps that led naturally to the second and third, and she was not going to leave gaps in the system she had built just because she might be leaving the outpost. She ran 2 training sessions with junior soldiers on wind reading fundamentals. She had one long conversation with Brooks that had began at 0430 on the tower platform and ended at 0615 when the morning rotation came on and they had to clear the position. That conversation was the most important one. She told him about the memorandum. She told him what Whitmore had recommended. She told him about the regional program. Brooks listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, "You're going." "Yes," she said, "you already decided." "I decided in Ewan's office," she said. "The 48 hours were for working out how I felt about it." "And how do you feel about it?" She thought about it. "Like it's the right door," she said. "And like leaving here is going to cost me something I didn't expect to have." He looked at her. "You mean the people?" "I mean you," she said. "And what we built here in this tower. That's not something it doesn't replicate easily." Brooks was quiet for a moment. He was doing the thing he did when something landed harder than he expected, looking at the middle distance, letting his face process what his words weren't ready for yet. "You built me into a better spotter," he said finally. "Whatever I am now at this, that's because of 19 nights in this tower with you." "You built yourself," she said. "I just gave you information." "You gave me the way of looking," he said. "That's not information. That's everything." She looked at him. He was 22 years old and she was 29, and she had known him for 43 days of official assignment, plus 19 nights of unofficial ones. And she understood sitting on that tower platform in the first light of a desert morning that the people who matter to you don't always come in the shapes you expect, and they don't always stay, and the rightness of what you built together doesn't require them to. "You're going to be excellent," she said. "You keep saying that because it keeps being true." He looked away. He looked back. "Will you let me know when you get there, when you're settled in?" "Yes," she said. "Good," he said, "because I'm going to want to know how a 12-person regional long-range program handles Sergeant Rachel Carter showing up and reorganizing their entire protocol within the first 2 weeks." She did almost smile again, the same small, brief corner of the mouth movement that he had seen once before and filed away. 3 weeks, she said. "Give me at least 3 weeks." The morning Kovac heard she was transferring, he found her in the supply bay. He didn't knock. He stood in the doorway and waited until she looked up. "Regional program," he said. "Yes, Sergeant." He was quiet for a moment. He came in. He stood with his arms at his sides, which was not his usual posture, in which she registered because she registered everything. "You deserve it," he said. "Thank you." "I'm not saying it for your benefit," he said. "I'm saying it because it's true and because I've been saying wrong things about you, and I need to practice saying the true ones." She looked at him. Something in that sentence, the specific honesty of it, the absence of self-protection, moved through her in a way that nothing else he had said had quite done. "That's a hard thing to say," she said. "Yeah," he said, "it is." "Then it means something that you said it." He nodded. He looked at the supply shelf, organized, labeled, fully logged. "You fixed the inventory system," he said. "It had gaps. The whole outpost runs better than it did when you got here," he said. Not just the long-range protocols, the medical supply accountability, the sensor log procedure, the training documentation. He paused. You did all of that while we had you logging numbers. The work was there, she said. I did the work. That's not, he stopped. He started again. What I mean is I put you in a corner and you improved the entire room. That's not normal. He stopped again. He seemed to be looking for a word and not finding the right one. That's what my grandfather called doing the work in front of you, she said. Whatever work is in front of you, you do it. You don't wait for the work you want. Kovac looked at her. He sounds like someone I would have wanted to know. Most people who knew him felt that way, she said. He put out his hand. She looked at it for a half second. Then she shook it. His grip was firm. Hers was too. Good luck, Carter, he said. Thank you, Sergeant, she said. He left. She stood in the supply bay for a moment after he was gone. She looked at the shelves she had organized. She looked at the miles she had rebuilt from a system that had gaps into a system that didn't. She looked at the inventory that would now be someone else's responsibility, and she thought about the soldier who would take it over, and she made a mental note to write a handover document that was thorough enough that the gaps wouldn't come back. She would write it tonight. She would have it done before she left, because that was how she did things. Her last night at Outpost Halcyon, she went to the South Watchtower alone. Not for a session, not for a scan. She went because it was the place where the most important things had happened, and she wanted to stand in it one more time before she left. She climbed the stairs. She stood at the forward wall. She looked at the Eastern Pass. She thought about 43 days that had begun in humiliation and ended in a tower that had changed everything. She thought about 19 nights of practice in the dark. She thought about the moment the radio had crackled with the convoy commander's voice breaking into pieces, and the moment she had put her cheek on the stock, and the moment the first shot had broken and everything had begun to move. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about cold hillsides and the patience of watching and the discipline of waiting for the right window. She thought about what he had given her, and she thought about the fact that what he had given her was not a skill. Skills were things you could describe in a manual document in a qualification record measure on a range. What he had given her was something that lived below the level of skill, a way of being present, a way of attending to the world, a way of finding stillness inside of difficulty and waiting without drifting, and absolutely knowing when the moment was exactly right. She thought that's the one, and she felt him there the way you feel people who are gone when you are in the place where what they gave you was most fully used. She felt him like a presence just behind her left shoulder, 50 meters back. Watching. Not checking, just watching. The way he had always watched, not to judge, not to evaluate, but because watching something that was right is a thing worth doing. She stood there for a long time. Then she came down the stairs. She went back to her bunk. She wrote the handover document. It was thorough. It covered everything. It would hold. She set it on the desk beside her bunk, and she lay down, and she slept without difficulty the way she always slept, fully efficiently without drama. And in the morning, she rose at 05:15 and packed her gear in 40 minutes because she had been packing efficiently since she was a girl in Montana. And at 0700, she walked out of Outpost Halcyon, with a duffel bag over her left shoulder and her rifle case in her right hand. Brooks was at the gate. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him. He looked at her. Watch the North Ridge in the morning, she said. The thermal signatures matter more than the surface movement. You know that. I know, he said, and fix the cable housing on the spotting scope. It's been loose for 2 weeks. I'll fix it today. Good. She started through the gate. Rachel, he said. She stopped. 3 weeks, he said. I'm giving you 3 weeks. She kept walking. Garza was at the operations building door watching. He had his notepad. He was always going to have his notepad. He watched her walk through the gate, and he watched her put her gear into the transport vehicle, and he watched the vehicle pull away, and he looked down at what he had written on the first page of the note to him 3 weeks ago and kept returning to without quite knowing why. She was the truth the whole time. He had written that in the middle of a day that had rearranged his understanding of what people could carry and what people could do and what it meant when someone looked at a person and saw the wrong thing. He was 19 years old. He was going to be in the Army for a long time. He was going to meet a lot of people, and some of them were going to be looked at wrong, and he was going to remember this. He was going to remember the motor pool and the woman on the ammunition crate and the way she said understood, and the 47 minutes and the machine gun at 890 meters, and the truck with the bad tire driving 12 miles to reach a 19-year-old boy, and the formation, and the back room, and the tower, and all of it. He was going to remember all of it. Because some stories don't need a monument. Some stories don't need a ceremony or a banner or a room full of people applauding. Some stories just need to be true and remembered and told to the people who weren't there. The transport vehicle reached the edge of the outpost road and turned east. Sergeant Rachel Carter was gone. And the truth of her, the complete, undiminished, fully accurate truth of what she was and what she had done and what she had carried without complaint and put down without ceremony. That truth remained at Outpost Halcyon long after she left, embedded in the protocols she had written, the system she had fixed the shooter, she had corrected the spotter she had built, and the 19-year-old boy in a medical facility somewhere who had told his mother about her, and whose mother lit a candle every morning for a woman she had never met but understood completely. Some things you do for someone because of what they did not, because of what they want. Rachel Carter never wanted recognition. She wanted the work in front of her done correctly. She wanted the ridge watched. She wanted the window found. She wanted the moment met with exactly what it required, nothing more and nothing less. And every single time the moment came, she was there, she was ready, and she was the most capable person in the room. That was not luck. That was not accident. That was Rachel Carter exactly as she had always been, long before anyone understood what they were looking at. She was the truth, and the truth was always going to hold.